Heyo, it's Livecold, and welcome to my post office. This is actually something I made for my survival series, for my survival world, to be part of my item sorting system, but you could use this to send items to your friends, assuming they're relatively close together, because it does work on a minecart system. So you kind of have to be like close enough for the minecarts to actually be able to travel between your bases or whatever. But we've got these stamps over here. Each of these corresponds to a different location, essentially. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the stamp in here, put the things we want to send into this second barrel, and then once those are all in and ready to go, we can send it off. And as you can see, these lights turn off once the mail has been sent off to tell us that we can't send any more mail right now. But if we wait a little bit, those lights will turn back on, telling us that we can send mail again. Now, you might have seen the minecart re-arrive here. This does work on a single minecart system that's part of this. That's just how I've set it up. This is by no means efficient in any way, shape, or form. But if you're making like a postal system as part of your item sorter, it wasn't going to be efficient in the first place. So yeah, definitely not the most efficient, but it is fun, it's cool, so let's go look at all the redstone. So it turns out that if you watch a few too many redstoners, and you've already got the baseless self-assurance of an engineer, you can convince yourself that you can do it. You'd be fine. It would be fine. It's easy, actually. And then you're completely wrong, but you do it anyways. So we'll go over this as like a general overview, and then we'll get into like the nitty gritty of each individual part. This entire thing is basically working off of the stamp system. So as I was saying before, we have just a single minecart going around, and basically that stamp system is telling us where we want that minecart to go. So we've got a basic item filter on the side here, basic item sorter on the side to tell us which item has come through. If we come around to the back here, we can see these droppers, which will release the stamp back into this water stream, sending it back up to the original barrel. So if I come back in here, you can see that that redstone has come back into that stamp barrel. So it's ready to be used again. Don't have to worry about restocking it or anything. This item sorter like toggles this redstone torch, which allows items through the hoppers and stuff. So when that toggles, it also toggles the dropper to release the item. So the observer sees the dropper release and it activates these rails, which then control the junctions of our minecart system. So for example, with this first one, this is what we sent through. We just need this first junction to toggle. So we send a signal out to this first junction to switch this rail from being in that orientation to this orientation. This guy sends the minecart over here. It's unloaded at this little minecart unloading station. This is not by any means efficient. It took a while for it to come back up, even with those few items that I put in it. So I'd probably replace this with something that is faster, because it takes a while to unload a minecart, and you don't really want to wait that long. As soon as it's ready, gets sent off again and back out to the start. Overall, all we're really doing is taking the item and figuring out which junctions need to switch in order to go to the location that item corresponds to. The way I've set it up here, the default, what would you call it? Default configuration of each of these junctions sends the minecart to continue along the path that would take it back to the start. So for here, rails are weird. They do weird things when they connect like that. So in this case, the default configuration of the rail is to just go forward, which is perfect. When we switch it out, it switches over, which is perfect. We're just using this copper bulb as a T flip-flop. This observer sees that this activator rail toggles on, and it sends a signal out the back through this repeater to this guy here, turns on, comparator reads the signal, and it holds this guy on. When this turns on, it sends a signal out here and retoggles the copper bulb and turns it off again. One thing to note about the setup of these, this repeater does have to be on a 2-tick delay. These droppers, when they trigger, here, let's do this really quick. You can see it here, watch these rails down here as I put this guy in. You see they toggle twice. And this, well, that's not hooked up to anything, but this bulb would turn on and turn back off if we didn't have this 2-tick delay. So if you're setting this up, when you're setting it up, you got to make sure that this repeater is on a 2-tick delay, or else your junctions won't toggle. And then let's say you have a rail like this where its default setup is to turn. The way you fix that is just by powering the rail. Oop. So over there, we have the sort of default configuration of that copper bulb as off. In this one, it's on. So it's just to make these rails go in the direction that leads back to the start at the beginning of the setup. But overall, this guy works the exact same. We got a 2-tick delay on here. Sends out a signal to this guy to control this junction. Detector rail detects when the minecart crosses, and it toggles this guy back to its default state. Oh, and then these guys up here. Same kind of thing. We got these detector rails that are just toggling the copper bulbs by powering the blocks above them. So when it goes off this way, it'll toggle it once to turn those bulbs off, and when it re-arrives, it'll toggle it again to turn the bulbs back on. And this guy here is just to slow the minecart down to get it in its proper position, because minecart hoppers are weird. If you put it in like that, it doesn't pick up any items, so it has to be like just below the barrel in order to actually pick anything up. So that guy is just slowing it down enough so that it doesn't go too far and shoot off again potentially, or do anything weird. But you can see here, it's now set up, it's picking up those items, and we can send it off again. So there's a couple different ways I've been thinking about of how you could set up this system. One is this way, which is, I think, the simpler one, where you have just a loop and you have different junctions coming off of the loop, and you always head back to the start. I think that's the simplest way to do it. The way I'd set that up is, instead of doing what I have here, where we've got rails here, observers reading the rails and shooting it down here. The reason this is set up like this is because I got this idea for this setup from the factory that Tango Tech is making in season 10 of Hermitcraft, the binary encoder. That's where I got this idea. So there's 2 of these guys because of that, but you don't have to do that by any means, especially with this where there's only one junction for each. So for example, we could just take this activator rail here that corresponds to location 1 and send it just straight here for this observer to read. Same thing for this second rail, which corresponds to junction 2. We could just send that straight over here, having the setup look something a little bit more like this, with these observers shooting out their signals as to which junctions need to switch, observers reading them and shooting them off to the sides if they need to. So that would be a much simpler way to do it if you only had to control one junction for each location. The other way I like to think about it, which is a bit more complicated, it might be a little bit more compact, but it's definitely more complicated, is to set it up more like a binary tree is kind of how I think about it, where each observer here reading these rails will correspond to the junctions that the minecart might see as it's going along its path. So what I mean by that is this first row is the first set of junctions, or the first junction the minecart might see. I keep falling off of these. And this second row is the second junction the minecart might see. So if we pretend to be the minecart really quick, we're coming along here. This copper block is the first junction we see. Now from here, we can either go straight or we can turn. And that's dependent on what happens at this first junction. But these second junctions are both controlled by if there's an observer or not on that second block. So both of these are controlled by this row. So for example, if we take this guy here, right? This first junction is off, so we're going straight, but this second junction is on, which means we would turn at that junction. So if we're this minecart and we're coming along, we hit this first junction and it is off, so we're going straight. And we hit this second junction, which is on, So we're turning. But the thing is, this other junction, this other second junction is also on because they're both the second junction. I'm really hoping that makes sense. It makes sense to my brain, but it is really hard to put into words. So this is a situation in which you do kind of want to have it in these sort of double rail system. This way, each of these rows can correspond to the junction number. And you can see here, if this would be the junction 2 setup, if we follow it along, we can see that there's an observer here and an observer also reading it off here to go to this junction. I didn't set all the redstone up because it would be a bit more messy, but you can see that there are these 2 observers that go to each of these junctions. And in this way, you could actually set it up so that each of your locations has kind of a zip code of 1s and 0s, which is kind of cool. But that's also another just optional thing you could toss in there. Anyways, that is my post office. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you liked it. I hope that all made sense. I've never explained redstone in my life, much less understood it. So this is a first for me, but let me know if that made sense. I really hope it did. I'm very excited to use this in my storage system. This is going to be ridiculously inefficient, but that's part of the fun. And let me know if you implement it in any of your worlds, because I think it would be fun to see what everybody's takes on stuff like this is. I will try to do a world download. I have it kind of all set up so that it's ready to do so, and all these signs around so that if you're like me and you've barely touched redstone a day in your life, there's stuff around here that explains what's going on at every component. So that should be helpful if I get around to getting a world download. I'm going to do my best. Poke me if I haven't done it. I'm going to try. But yeah, that's it for this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!